Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. 66-year-old Geraldine Largay was a retired nurse who loved hiking. It has been her lifelong dream to hike the Appalachian Trail. So together with her close friend, she courageously went for this once-in-a-lifetime adventure. However, excitement and adrenaline were replaced with panic and anxiety when she got lost in the woods and could not find her way back to the trail. This is her horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. For most people close to her, she was known as Jerry, a thoughtful friend, a loving wife to George, a caring mother to Carrie, their only daughter, and a cool grandmother to Carrie's children. Jerry and George had transferred to Atlanta after being in Nashville for most of their lives. It was in Atlanta that her love for the great outdoors grew more and more. She would always go trekking through the forest every week, foraging as she went along the trails. Sometimes, she would have her daughter and grandchildren come along. There was no doubt Jerry loved nature and loved basking in its beauty. In fact, Jerry has always wanted to hike America's longest trail, the Appalachian Trail, which runs 2,190 miles from Maine to Georgia. Trekking its full length would mean 5 to 7 months of non-stop hiking, just camping up to sleep and recharge before getting back on the trail again. This also meant that hikers needed to bring along supplies that could last them the entire duration of the hike. Her husband George was hesitant when Jerry first mentioned she'd love to pursue this lifelong dream. Although Jerry was generally still in good physical condition, she had just recovered from a back injury. The thought of Jerry carrying a heavy load on her back worried George, but Jerry already had her mind set on doing the hike. For her, it was now or never. Being the supportive husband that he was, George reluctantly agreed, but managed to think of a strategy that could help Jerry in her months-long adventure. They agreed to meet up every so often at designated checkpoints along the trail for George to refill her supplies, just so she did not need to bring all of it all the way. George would drive miles as Jerry hiked the trail, and would wait for her at specific areas where there were entry points to the trail. Together with her friend, Jane Lee, Jerry began her life's ultimate adventure on April 23, 2013. Starting from the West Virginia entry point of the trail, they hiked up on the way to Mount Katahdin. Aside from nature, Jerry also loved journaling, so a journal was a must-have for this adventure, and her journal's first record of the hike wrote, "This has been a long time in the planning, and we are excited and a little nervous to begin this adventure." Along the way, she would document how the view was amazingly magical, taking note of every beautiful and unique flora and fauna they had come across with. Their journey started great, and it was only getting better. Twice a week, George and Jerry would meet up to refill their supplies as they had arranged, and everything was going according to plan. 2 months later, however, Jane received news from her family of an emergency that made her decide to immediately cut her trip short. Jane wanted Jerry to come home with her since she knew it was not good for her to be alone on such a long hike. But Jerry was persistent. She has come a long way into her dream now, and there was no stopping her at that point. Somehow, her confidence in this adventure has slowly built up, hiking all day, setting up camp to sleep the night away, making a brief stop at lean-to shelters along the trail, and getting to meet George twice in a week have all become a familiar routine for the last 2 months. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Well, at least for 3 weeks. By July 21, Jerry had arrived at the Poplar Ridge shelter, which was 22 miles away from the checkpoint that she and George are about to cross paths again. Jerry spent the night at the shelter, and it was where she met Dorothy Boynton Rust, and the two hikers became instant friends. Jerry left the shelter in the morning of July 22. It was a Monday then. She was set out to hike the whole day, going to another lean-to shelter at Spalding Mountain, where she was supposed to sleep that night. Come Tuesday, she would continue on to the exit point to Route 27, where she would meet up with George in the afternoon. As she was making her way to the next lean-to, she felt the urge to urinate, so she had to get off the trail a bit into the woods to find a secure spot. Now, when Jane was still with her, What they did was to take turns covering for each other while peeing so it was easier. However, With no one to cover for her, she decided to go a little bit further than usual to make sure she won't be seen by other hikers. It was only after she was done that it dawned on her. She no longer knew where she was and how to find her way back to the trail. It was around 11 in the morning, and by 11:01, Jerry decided to send George a message, informing him that she got off the trail to relieve herself but got lost and could not find her way back. She asked George if he can call a trail mountaineer to help her somewhere north of Woods Road. However, network signal was nowhere to be found either. Thinking there would be a better signal if she went higher, Jerry slowly moved farther to a higher area. She also hoped she could see where the trail was from above, but as she moved higher, the way out got bleaker and bleaker. The sun was already setting at that point, and as the sky got darker, Jerry decided she needed to set up camp and sleep there. Even with Jerry's unshakable persistence and determination, she also had vulnerable points. She had tendencies of easily overcome by anxiety and sometimes even had panic attacks. Alone in the dark forest and faced with many uncertainties, she could not help it but felt panic starting to creep in on her. The following morning, heavy rain greeted her. It was already Tuesday, the day she and George had arranged to meet again at Route 27. Unable to think clearly on what to do next, all she did was try sending another message to George, asking for help, but again, to no avail. Clueless of what happened to his wife, George arrived at Route 27 in the afternoon, expecting Jerry to be there anytime soon. Jerry did not arrive as scheduled. As the sky grew dark, there were still no signs of Jerry, but George did not find it alarming because he knew mobile signal was hard to find along the trail. The heavy rain might have made things worse as well. He was pretty sure it would slow down Jerry's already slow pace, the very reason why she got herself the trail name Inchworm. After more than 24 hours waiting for her at their designated meeting place, the skies had already cleared up and George was starting to get worried, so he no longer delayed reporting her as missing. Immediately, a search and rescue operation was mounted, starting from the Poplar Ridge shelter where she was last seen. According to one volunteer caretaker of the trail, for people who are not familiar with the trail, it is so easy to get lost in circles. Go beyond 20 to 50 feet away from the trail, you'd barely be able to see it from where you are, and it would take you hours to get back on it. Jane would also recount that when they were still doing the hike together, Jerry would quickly become uneasy and aggressive the few times that she mistakenly went off the trail. It was Jane who helped Jerry gather herself, as she would always calmly lead her back to the trail. However, by herself, Jane feared that if Jerry had indeed gotten lost in the thick forest, she might find it extremely difficult to get back on track. Jerry, on the other hand, decided it was not good to just sit there and do nothing waiting for help to find her. So she went on and tried to continue looking for a way out of the woods. As she came across the stream, a glimmer of hope sparked in Jerry, as she knew she could survive longer as long as she could drink water. She set up camp near the stream and put up her silver blankets onto the tree, hoping the rescuers could notice it. She only had 3 days worth of food supplies in her backpack by then, so she tried to eat only bits and pieces so it could last longer. As rescuers continued to scan through the vast area, they find suspicious items which they feared were of Jerry. These were water bottles, drops of blood, hair strands, and an old band-aid. However, the DNA found in all these items did not match Jerry's. Upon hearing the sad news, Dorothy, who goes by the nickname Dottie, shared the last picture of Jerry at the Poplar Ridge shelter, the same day she first went missing. Jerry was all smiles in her bright red fleece jacket before leaving that morning. Little did they know, it would be Jerry's last picture. Maine State Police printed her picture in paper posters and distributed it all over town as they looked for leads on Jerry's whereabouts. Many possible angles arose, such as murder, a bear attack, Jerry falling into the river, or having suffered a great injury. The closest possible lead they received was that from some of the other hikers that saw an elderly woman who was by herself just around the Spalding Mountain lean-to, where Jerry planned to sleep that night. Then, another hiker claimed she was with Inchworm that night at the Spalding lean-to. These leads seemed to give hope to the rescue team. Their focus now shifted to the stretch between Spalding Mountain lean-to and the exit point to Route 27 where George was waiting. However, it turned out to be the greatest distraction, as it veered them away from where they were supposed to search for Jerry. Considering how the search they did was so extensive, it was mind-blowing that they were not able to trace Jerry. Rescuers had bikes, ATVs, and even helicopters, but all these equipments did not bring them to where Jerry was. When Jerry heard the sound of the helicopters flying low, she felt a sense of relief knowing that there were ongoing efforts to look for her. She waved frantically at the helicopter and shouted as loud as she could with all the energy she had left, but the thick forest concealed her from their sight. 1 week after, she tried to run and follow the noise of the plane that flew by, but her energy had already been drained at that point. With no food left, reality sank in. She was going to die in hunger. But as she thought about George being left behind, she continued to fight for her dear life. It was August 6, 16 days after she went missing, and more than a week since Jerry's last food intake. She turned her phone on, only to find out there was still no signal. So, using her last ounce of energy, she started a fire, her final hope of being found. Gradually, she began to come to terms with the reality of death, and in her journal, she penned the words, "When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead and where you found me, no matter how many years from now. Please find it in your heart to mail the contents of this bag to one of them." Just around the same time, a hiker whose trail name was Ivanich called the police. Ivanich looked much like Jerry, only more silent and detached, which matched the description of some of the hikers who thought it was Inchworm they saw at the Spalding Mountain lean-to. Ivanich recounted that she also slept the night at the Poplar Ridge shelter on July 21, when Inchworm was also there. Inchworm started 2 hours earlier than her. What was strange was the fact that Ivanich was faster than Inchworm and could have easily caught up with her along the way to Spalding Mountain, but she claimed she never saw Inchworm on her way. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months. The rescue team were still unable to find her, or at least any trace of Jerry. Until 2 years later, a forester at the Navy accidentally found a collapsed and abandoned tent with a dead body inside a sleeping bag, a journal detailing all that had happened, and her cell phone with all the messages that failed to send. As soon as the police got the news, they hurriedly went to the site as they were positive it was finally the closure of the Geraldine Largay case. In her journal, she wrote heartfelt letters for each and every one of her family and told them how much they meant to her. Her final entry was dated August 18, although it's uncertain if the dates Jerry used was still accurate. This meant that she most probably fought for her life for 26 days. Had rescuers found her within that time frame, Jerry could have made it. Tragically, she did not. The greatest irony of it all was that Jerry's body was found within the parcel of land that belonged to the Navy and served as a training ground for survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. Around 130 experienced rescuers, including teams of survival experts from the Navy, helped with the search. But not one of them could find Jerry. And on top of it all, what was even more devastating to know was that the tent where her remains were found was only almost 2 miles away from the trail and another 30 minutes to a lodging site. If only Jerry had just turned towards the south and continued to walk for a couple of meters, she could have made it her way back to the trail. Jerry was inches away from fulfilling her dreams. Nevertheless, she died doing what she has always wanted to do. In the place where she had dreamt of her whole life, she breathed her last. Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, please click the subscribe button and check out our other videos. Click that video on the left for more of these climbing incidents, or you may also want to check out other horrifying stories.